My name is Julie Ann Link, and welcome to the Music Link. This week on the Let's Link project, I'd like to welcome Cleveland Orchestra Assistant Principal Bassoonist and Instructor of Bassoon at the Cleveland Institute of Music and Kent Blossom Music, Barrick Stees. Barry, thank you for joining today.
Julie, it's great to be with you.
I'll just start out. Please share an overview of who you are and what you do as a professional musician.
Okay. Well, I'm a bassoonist in the Cleveland Orchestra in the United States, and I am my position is assistant principal bassoon, which requires me to play some of the first bassoon parts, but also third bassoon, and fill in when others are taking vacation. So it's a sort of a utility player role that I have.
Could you tell me a little bit about your childhood and where you grew up?
I grew up in Illinois, right in the middle of the country. My father is a minister, and we moved around a fair amount. So I spent time in small towns and also in suburban Chicago. And in suburban Chicago was where I got most of my musical training as a young person. So I played in the youth orchestra in Chicago and took lessons with somebody in the Chicago Symphony and regularly heard concerts there. It was a good environment for me growing up.
Do any of your family members have a musical background?
Everybody was sort of an amateur musician. My mother was a amateur string bass player, and my father played the tuba in high school but didn't do anything with it. And all of my siblings, for a little while at least, played an instrument and the piano.
How did you get introduced to music then?
Well, music was introduced in the public schools, of course, and also the music in the family was a big deal. And so we were encouraged to pick up a musical instrument and learn it, at least through our high school years. So the environment I was in was very intense, and so there was a lot of stimulation and a lot of inspiration for me. And I saw some things that I really wanted to do, and found the bassoon to be a pretty agreeable instrument for me. I started on the instrument, which is unusual, I think. I started when I was 11, and I played piano for several years, and I was pretty good, but gave it up when I got to college. There just wasn't time to keep that up. But the piano gave me a good start for music theory and also thinking about bass lines and harmonies too.
What did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, I guess from about the age 15 or 16, I wanted to play in a symphony orchestra. So that was something that was a pretty singular focus of mine from that point.
Could you tell me about your childhood hobbies?
Yeah, what did I do? I had I played a lot of cowboys and Indians growing up, like a lot of young kids did. I was in the Cub Scouts for a while. Very, very small amount of other hobbies, but sports were big. I ran track and cross country. I wrestled. Those were other pursuits of mine. But you know, by the time high school hit, I was pretty focused on music and playing the bassoon. So the other things like the Cub Scouts and so on had to go by the wayside.
What different instruments do you play?
I didn't play anything else, just the bassoon.
Can you share an overview of where you went to college and what you studied?
Yes, I went to the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York, and studied with legendary teacher David Van Hoosen. And the school was terrific. It was a great place to be. There was so many incredible bassoon players there during my time there. But probably the hidden secret about Eastman was that it was also a really great place for liberal arts education. I had a really good German teacher that I'm still in touch with, an art teacher that was inspirational, a Shakespeare teacher, a number of teachers that were not music teachers, but were really good and inspiring.
Hmm. Barry, could you talk a little bit about David Van Hoosen?
Yeah, David Van Hoosen was probably the best teacher I ever had for any subject, and any music teacher. He had a real knack for getting the best out of the student in the lesson. I was able to observe other students' lessons from time to time, and of course we would talk about our lessons after they were over. And I noticed that he adjusted his teaching style to the individual that he was teaching. There wasn't a cookie cutter approach to teaching. There's an extensive interview I did with him on my website, and I've been interviewed about him before at length. So if people want more information, they can look on my website and learn more about him. But he also was really good at following up after you left school and helping you further in your career, always willing to hear you play before an audition or just give advice over the phone. So he was a mentor even after graduation.
Could you share more of an overview of your life while you were at university, being at Eastman?
Yeah, well, I made a point of seeking out anything at a college that was excellent, colleagues that played well, concerts that were good, books, anything that taught excellence and how to achieve. That was something I really thrived on. Going to school in Rochester at the time was not a very fun experience. It was a pretty dirty, grimy, unsafe city. So there weren't a lot of distractions. So as long as you stuck to the dormitory and the school pretty much, you had a pretty intense focus. There wasn't a lot of social life available, and if you did try to find it, it probably wasn't particularly safe or savory, let's put it that way. So there was a lot of time to really get together with students and talk about music, talk about trends in the art world, music world, and talk about your sound, talk about your practicing. Those sorts of things were things we did actually in our off hours.
What did you learn about yourself during college?
I learned what my limits were as a player. I learned also how I worked best, what style of practicing worked best for me. I also learned to think of music as fitting into a bigger a bigger orbit of the arts, and how literature informed composers, how art informed composers, and to think of things in those terms for me was very helpful, and got me using my imagination more, that sort of thing.
Did you ever consider changing careers while studying or after graduation?
There was a short period of time after graduation where I was newly married, and a lot of financial pressure was on us, and I was freelancing in Chicago and working in a record store full time, and things, were not moving quickly. I considered it, but I didn't really have any plans or concrete ideas about what I would do. But I was pretty stubborn and kind of just stuck to it and hammered away at it until something popped loose and a job came my way. I'm not sure the world is like that anymore. I think that there are and that the opportunities now for people that are in their 20s is fewer in the orchestra world, and they have to be more realistic than I was. It wasn't easy, I won't say that, but I think that it was it wasn't as dire as it is now. I feel like we're in an inflection point, and it's hard to see how far, which way things will go with the orchestra world.
Hmm. Could you tell me a bit more about your music teachers in high school?
Yes, I studied with Wilbur Simpson, the second bassoonist in the Chicago Symphony. He was a good teacher. Something he did with me that very few teachers were doing at the time was he had me learning orchestra excerpts and orchestra parts. He would get out the music to something Chicago Symphony was playing that week and put it on my music stand and ask me to play it, that sort of thing. I don't know how much of that is happening now, probably more than when I was coming up, but teachers back then were just not doing it. I mean, when I got to Eastman, I had played, a fair amount of the standard repertoire, at least in my practicing. And the other two bassoonists in my class had not done much, if any, of that in their studies. It was different. That was a different focus that they had. The other great teacher I had was E. Sanford Berry. Sandy Berry was the teacher at the Interlochen Arts Camp. Then it was called the National Music Camp. I went there for 4 summers, and he was a fine teacher and a great bassoon player. Also a good influence on me. My junior high band director, I remember him. He was a very strict band director, kind of military in a certain way. Maybe overdoing it, but he was very charismatic and inspired us to play together and have a pride about what we were doing and so on. And I picked up on some of that. And he was also smart enough to send me in the direction of an actual bassoon player for lessons. He started me off himself, but he knew he was out of his league pretty quickly and got me with a teacher. So that was a good move that he made.
Could you tell me about your teaching career and even your teaching philosophy?
Mm-hmm. I've always taught very informally at first, but starting in 1991, when I joined the faculty of Michigan State University, I had to learn how to be a full-time college music school teacher. And it was something I became very good at. I am good at teaching, I'm good at recruiting, but I didn't know what I was doing starting off. I mean, there were many things that I had to figure out. And I was able to do it, and I had a lot of good support from the department chair and colleagues and stuff. But I started at Michigan State with 1 bassoon major and the expectation that I would have a full studio by the time tenure arrived. And so that was like a gun to my temple to get out and recruit. So I learned how to do that. I taught for 5 years at the Interlochen Arts Camp in the summer, 4 years at the Interlochen Arts Academy, where I had some amazing students, many of whom are playing in major orchestras in the country right now. And I also taught at the Brevard Music Center in the summers. And I was able to continue teaching when I won the position in Cleveland by joining the Cleveland Institute of Music faculty. So I do that, and I also teach at the Kent Blossom Music in the summer. My teaching philosophy is to try to meet the student where they are and bring them to awareness and to some sort of new level in each lesson so that they can stretch and grow. I firmly believe that you can, if you understand how a student learns, if you can sense that they're a visual learner or some other kind of learner, you can demonstrate more, or you can illustrate more. You can use a whole battery of teaching tools to reach them. Some of this for one student, some of this for another student, so that you should be able to explain a concept maybe 2 or 3 different ways, and also be able to demonstrate it. If the first attempt to make the student understand what you're saying fails, you need to find another way to play it, or sing it, or talk about it. That's very important. Also, you need to find the breaking point with each student. You need to go to the point where you can sense that further pushing of them is not going to be productive, but you do need to find out where that point is. So you can't be too comfortable with them. You need to push them to a point where you know how much they can handle, because let's face it, there aren't recruiters from the New York Philharmonic in the halls of music schools with signing bonus checks in their pockets, you know. And so they need to be pushed, and pushed hard. But you also need to know how far to go with that, because there is a point where it becomes counterproductive and destructive, actually. So being able to remove yourself from the situation, or knowing when to lay off the gas pedal is really, really important, I think. Mm-hmm. I think it's important to, since students develop on the whole rather slowly, it's important to make yourself available after graduation for future contact for their development. In my case, my reed making was rather poor when I graduated, and I needed more skills and more help. And so that was something that I needed help with after I graduated. It wasn't a finished product. There are many skills that are not finished in a 4-year undergraduate, or even a 4-year undergraduate and a 2-year master's program. There's all kinds of things that still have to develop over time for most people.
Could you tell me more about your chamber music and orchestra career?
Yeah, I've done a lot of chamber music playing. I've been in played in professional quintets that had subscription series. Did touring and stuff like that. That was a lot of fun. I was lucky to play in a quintet where everybody liked each other. Everybody liked playing in quintet. You know, that's very unusual, and everybody could play their instrument well. You get all 3 of those, you're really lucky. Usually it's 2 out of 3 or 1 out of 3. So we had a really good group. This was at the University of Akron several years ago when I was teaching there as well. Yeah, so I've done a lot of that. I've done just about everything there is to do with the bassoon in my career. So there isn't much that I haven't done. Maybe my resume is a little light on the opera side, but I have played a fair number of operas for a symphonic musician. So, and I've played in all kinds of orchestras. I mean, I've played in community orchestras all the way up through world-class orchestras. So I've seen it all, done it all. I know what works in those situations and what doesn't work. It's interesting.
Please tell me about your favorite audition or competition experience.
Oh, well, I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but the most extraordinary audition experience would be my Cleveland Orchestra auditions. So the first audition, I auditioned 3 times for my position over the space of 9 months. The first audition was in January of 2001, and got in there and drew number 1 to start in my group. And a lot of people feel like drawing number 1 is bad luck, and I'm here to tell you that it's not, because it worked out. But so went through, and my thought was, okay, yeah, I can be home home in Michigan by noon because I thought this, there's no way this is going to work out. And as it turned out, there were 3 rounds that day, and I played all 3, and they didn't hire anybody because some people that they were wanting to hear didn't show up, among other things, and they couldn't come to a decision. But the personnel manager took me aside and said, we're interested in hearing you again. We'll look for contact from us later, and we'll invite you back and hear you again. So that then we went home, and in May they had another audition and went through a couple rounds, at which all rounds I drew number 1 each time. And then I got to the end of that audition, and there was a final round with me and one other bassoonist. And again, for some reason, they couldn't reach a decision. And when these things happen, the music director needs to be around for an audition to be scheduled. So that often entails waiting months for the next time when the music director's back in town. These conductors are very tightly scheduled, and a lot of them don't live in the cities that they conduct in. So that was the case in Cleveland. Anyway, so then they scheduled another trial, and in this case, instead of going through the solo audition again, they put me and this other person in different weeks in the orchestra and played in the orchestra, which is unusual for an American orchestra to do. But I think they needed a different yardstick. So anyway, my week was in September, and my first rehearsal was on Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. So that was a very, very strange day. Got into the players' lounge to go warm up, put my coat away and stuff, and I looked over at the TV, and there were some buildings in New York City that were smoking, and nobody knew anything that was going on at that point. So I was curious, but it was very strange and concerning. Went upstairs into Severance Hall to start the rehearsal, and we were playing Mahler's Fifth. Got on stage, and people were warmed up, and the executive director came out and said, well, there's been a national tragedy, and we're canceling both rehearsals today for you to go contact people in New York that you might know to check on them. And so they canceled those rehearsals, and that was it. And from a selfish standpoint, it looked as though my trial week was going to be, was going to evaporate. I had been assigned to play the first bassoon part on these little Wagner songs that we were doing, but our soloist was grounded in Florida. The planes weren't flying, so she couldn't get up to sing with us. So that piece was canceled. Therefore, I was playing the little third bassoon part on Mahler's Fifth, which has this stuff in the third and in the last movement of any note, and doubling the first bassoon part during the tutti section. So there was very little chance for them to hear what I could do. So the week went on, and we played our first concert on Thursday night. And afterwards, the personnel manager came up to me and said, well, the committee met, and the committee wants to be sure that we hear you play. And so we're putting you on the first bassoon part in the concert on Friday night, the next night. So no rehearsal, no sound check, just go right into that chair and play the first bassoon part without having rehearsed it with the Cleveland Orchestra. Keep in mind that my home orchestra was the Greater Lansing Symphony Orchestra at this time. So this was a very different level of playing, pretty different. So, okay, so then Friday night comes around, and I walk on stage to get warmed up, and my colleague, Jeff Rathbun, turns around, the oboe player, and I'm warming up, and he says, "You're not going to use that reed, are you?" And I knew enough about Jeff to know that he was kidding, right? Yeah, he wasn't trying to make me nervous. He was trying to help me, actually. So that was really good. So I somehow was able to understand that at the time, even though I was very nervous. And we started the piece, and for every bassoon entrance, Christoph von Dohnanyi's eyes were right on me the whole time. I think he was really nervous that I was going to screw up his performance. Somewhere in the third movement, he started then looking around the orchestra to cue other people besides me. I think that he had gained some confidence in me by that point. So, and finished the concert. I thought it went pretty well. And then there was a Saturday night concert where I slid back into the third bassoon position and did the doubling in the little third bassoon part that's in the orchestra. And then I went home and waited a week while the other person played his trial week, and then I got a phone call hiring me. So that was the way that ended up. But that was a pretty unusual audition circumstance, I think.
Mm.
But it actually did show what an assistant principal has to do more often than you would think. We just did a tour of China now a year and a half ago, where our principal bassoonist got sick and actually had to go home at the beginning of the tour. And I had to play Tchaikovsky Fifth, Einheldenleben, and Prokofiev Third Symphony with no rehearsal on first bassoon. Just go in and play concerts, 9 concerts in China. And that's part of the job. You just have to be ready to do that. And, there's not much margin for error in those situations. So that was actually a very good test, the way that turned out.
Thank you for sharing, Barry. Wow. Would that go down as your most memorable concert?
I suppose so. I mean, there's been a lot of others, I guess. I've always loved Wagner operas, and so for me, getting a chance to play a semi-staged version of Siegfried with the Cleveland Orchestra during my first season was a very big deal. Playing Der Rosenkavalier semi-staged, that to me was very exciting too. But yeah, well, that one, I mean, the one you win your job on, I mean, that's always memorable for anyone who's in that situation.
How do you handle performance anxiety?
Performance anxiety is always there. Anyone who says they don't get nervous is lying. That's just a bunch of bravado, I think. Everyone gets nervous. I still get nervous. The preparation is really the biggest thing. If you're really prepared and kind of know what can go wrong and how to handle it, usually you get through pretty okay. You manage okay, but there are a couple things I try to do that help, I think. When I have the chance, before I have a big solo, if there's rest before the big solo, I try to slow my breathing down. In fact, I even do will exhale as completely as I can and stay empty for a few seconds and just sit there with that emptiness. And then the next breath I take is for the solo entrance. I think that helps a lot. Also, if it's possible at all, to just focus on one or two things. What is the biggest job you have to accomplish when you play this solo, or if there's an image that you want to put in your mind that puts you in the best frame of mind to play. Those are very important things. Trying to get outside of your head too. If you listen to your colleagues playing and focus on what they're doing, quite often that will calm you down. But if you're stuck inside your head, that can be self-destructive. Those are some things I try to do that I find helpful.
Have you experienced any music-related injuries?
Yes. Yeah, sure. I have I have some arthritis in my thumbs that flare up from time to time, makes it difficult. You know, occasionally a little left wrist or left forearm strain will come in, or a little back thing. But I try to stay in really good shape physically, so that helps me. I do a little bit of strength training, but mostly I'm a very big runner, big avid runner. And I think it keeps me supple, generally speaking, you know. So I've been very lucky. I have not, trying to think, and I don't think I've been out for an injury, you know. So we're fortunate. If you play in a 3-person section, you're going to be playing a lot more. We got a 4-person section, and so it's a little more forgiving. Those people in the three-person sections in orchestras, especially if you're a bigger orchestra, you know, like in the U.S., if you're the Milwaukee Symphony or I think Baltimore Symphony, all 3 of those people are working really hard when they're playing, you know. So we have a little bit of an easier time. I mean, don't get me wrong, we're playing a lot, but when there's 4 of you to spread the work around, it's easier, you know.
What is your favorite bassoon piece and why?
Yeah, you know, I don't know if I have a favorite bassoon piece. I'm not a big fan of bassoon literature myself. I don't know, really skillfully written pieces for the bassoon that I think have some beauty and some brilliance to it. The Tonsman Suite, Tonsman Sonatine, those are really skillfully written, good pieces for the bassoon. The song has its moments. The 3rd movement opening is not very well composed, not a good piece there. But there are some other parts of it that are quite beautiful and very effective. You know, the Mozart Concerto, it's a young piece by a young composer. It's his first wind concerto. For what it is, it's a very nice piece. The 2nd movement is beautiful, but it doesn't come close to the Clarinet Concerto, for instance, in quality or spirit or depth. So I wouldn't go to that. Some pieces that have been written for me, I think were especially fun and enjoyable, probably just because they were written for me. You know, others may not like them as much as I do, but Miguel de la Aguila's Nostalgica is a deeply moving piece. You know, Jeff Rathman wrote a piece for me called Shapes that involves my wife's image knits, her digitally manipulated artwork. These are on my YouTube channel. You can check them out. Those are you know, really wonderful pieces that I enjoy playing. No, I don't know. I would go to music by music for other instruments or voice or something like that first before the bassoon.
Do you have any favorite chamber music pieces?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Schubert Octet is a great piece. Not a great bassoon part, but it's a great piece. I mean, that's a really wonderful Mozart Piano Wind Quintet. That's a great piece. You know, really nice. The piece for bassoon and string quartet, Nostalgica. That's a good piece for chamber music. If you consider the Pulcinella Suite chamber music, I would put that in a special place too. Those are some pieces that come to mind.
And then do you have any favorite orchestral works?
Yeah. Brahms Symphony No. 3 is one of my favorite pieces. Almost never played. And when they do program it, they usually put it on the first half because it has a soft ending. That's a terrific piece. Bach B minor Mass is a great piece. Mahler Symphony Number 9. I think that's a good piece. There's so many of them. Yeah, those are good ones though. I like those.
Could you please tell me about your reed making style and techniques?
Yeah, again, I point people to my website, my blog, because it's hard to explain reed making an interview like this. But yeah, I mean, I'm not quite sure where to start talking about this.
How about, yeah, maybe your process? Would you like to share? And I know this is all on your website as well, or just yeah, maybe walk through a little bit of your process.
Yeah, all right. Well, okay, so the cane needs to be selected for straightness and for hardness and density. If you're not doing that, you're wasting a lot of time and dulling a lot of tools on bad cane. Straightness, proper hardness, and proper density does not isolate excellent pieces of cane. What it does is it eliminates the outliers, the ones that will never make a good reed. And so just getting a narrower sample to work with is really helpful. That's really, really important. So yeah, then you know, gouging and profiling. Again, I'm not quite sure what to say about that. I prefer a slightly elliptical gouge because I like to trim my reeds thinner at the tip than some do, so that the sides have a little strength but are very thin. If you use an elliptical gouge, the cane's harder on those sides, and so there's a little more support there. I think also if you don't like breaking reeds in, you can save time by soaking the cane before processing it. 2 24-hour soakings where you change the water so there isn't any, you know, buildup of junk. I find that you spend less time breaking the reed in when you do that, and you can get the reed trimmed down to close to final specs of thickness in you know, maybe 2 sessions, because the cane is not, you know, breaking in as much because it's already been done. You know, the soaking process leaches out a lot of the impurities in the cane and just gets it ready for maturing correctly, you know. So yeah, and so when I you know, gouge, shape, and profile my reeds, then I make them immediately into a sort of blank, but I do the bevel after I form the blank, so that I use the bevel to create a lever action on the blades from the tube end. I do this to help sharp low register and ease of articulation in the low register. Again, because when you have a lever action on the back of the reed and it gives a little more lift to the blade, the corners where the low notes live on the reed live in the corners, okay, in the rails in the corners. If those collapse too readily, you lose the lows in the sound, and you lose the low notes. So having the bevel in there, it keeps the shape of the reed, instead of so much like this, it's just a little more like that. Okay, so those corners stay more open towards the corner. That's very helpful, I think. I do that, and then to actually work on the blank, and I think also, and everybody does this, right? The longer it sits on the drying rack, the higher percentage of good reeds you're going to have. So at least a week, you know, a month is wonderful. Longer is even better if you can afford to. So you have always this pipeline of reeds in various stages of assembly and scrape and so on. I use what's called an ultimate reed finishing machine, although it really isn't. But it's like a tip profiler, except it scrapes most of the blade. I use that for finishing, and then there's always a few thousandths of an inch to come off everywhere on the reed except for the heart, which is pretty close to specs when I'm done. So with the first scrape, and I know this is unusual, but I save a lot of time. My first scrape gets down to like 2 thousandths within finished thickness. And I almost never have trouble with a sagging first finger E, for instance, when I do that. I think it's partly because the cane is broken in more or less, and I've got that strength from the bevel and a few other things working for it. And so then trying to read out is something I do, and I don't believe in playing anything above a high G or high A on a new reed. There's absolutely no reason to do that. Reeds always stiffen up a little bit after you play them in, and those high C's and D's will come in later. I don't think it's good for a reed to be squeezed open and shut quite a lot, which is what you're doing when you're playing up high. A reed needs to be taught how to vibrate. You need to learn how to play it too. So part of breaking a reed in is teaching yourself how to make this reed sound best. So during break-in, I'm always adjusting my face on the reed and the airspeed and amount of air so that I find out what that reed needs to sound its best. Not a lot of teachers teach this. A lot of teachers teach, here's the reed, make it this way and blow it this way. And if it doesn't work, can't do anything about it. I believe there's a little more fringe work that can be done to make more reeds at least usable and decent, because we're not always going to have a perfect reed on our vocal. So learning how to address the reed with your body is very important. If you got a reed that's a little bit bright, why not use a cushier embouchure and not shove a bunch of air against the reed? You know, don't do that. Don't firm the muscles in your face if the reed is bright. You know, cushion that reed, treat it gently, and you know, that'll be a reed that you might use. Maybe it won't be your performance reed, but you could practice on it or play a rehearsal on it. You know, and that's all good, because the other thing we need to do is conserve our best reeds for the time when we really need them. We can't play on our best reed every day. I never play on the same reed every day. Every time I get my case out, open my case, I don't know which reed I'm going to reach for. You know, I have a good idea, but I'll get out a couple reeds and soak 2 or 3, try them out, put away the ones that aren't going to work for me that day. You know, things that a reed needs to do right off the bat, or I reject it. A reed needs to have a pianissimo right away. If you want to play in a really good orchestra, you need to have a pianissimo. A lot of orchestras do not have a pianissimo, a true pianissimo. And you know, your loud range sounds louder if you have a real pianissimo. Okay. If you have a mezzo piano to forte or fortissimo, that may get you only so far. But if you have pianissimo and piano, and your other colleagues do too, then you've got what appears to be a really big fortissimo. Okay, so if you have that level set here instead of here, you know, so you've got to have reeds that do that. It's very important. And I don't think that when you make a reed that has a pianissimo, that it's not going to have a forte or a fortissimo. I don't think that's the case with me. I don't have a problem with that. What I miss in some of my reeds is that pianissimo. I don't miss the forte or fortissimo. I know how to do that. Okay. I think there's a fallacy that says you have to make a loud reed and sacrifice the pianissimo. I think that's not right. It doesn't work that way. So that's extremely important. And the way to check that is if you can do like a clarinet or bass clarinet does and play a smooth scale in a subtone. Can you do that? if you can't do that and you have some dropouts in the scale, then your reed blades are probably imbalanced or the cane is not of good quality. Okay. Another thing a good reed needs to do is it needs to be able to change modes of vibration easily. In other words, if the first mode is low F up to open F, the second mode is open F up to D. And then when we add cross fingerings, that's the third mode. Okay. So if you do a broken arpeggio of low F up to C, A, up to F, back to C, up to flick A, open F, up to C with a flick, down to A, F. And if some of those notes, some of those intervals have a click in them, then you've got some imbalance in the blade. But again, you can also teach yourself how to play on this reed to make those slurs smooth, okay? Because a beautiful legato is something that people really admire about a great woodwind player, right? Beautiful legato is something like a singer has instead of something that's bumpy. So you can teach yourself how to play with that smooth legato, again, by how you meter your air through the mouth and into the reed, and how your face and your throat and your breath support mechanism is set up. The minute adjustments of that can make those intervals really smooth. A really good idea is to think of a low note as being, I'll do it this way. A low note is here, and then the upper note, this is volume from here to here, that's volume, okay? The upper note fits inside like a mortise and tenon, or like a tenon in your boot joint, okay? So when you do play an upward interval, if you do all the work on the low note and let the upper note more or less play itself, you have a smooth connection. But if you're straining for the high note and your air is metered like this, then we'll hear that bump. So there's like a masking that occurs when there's great resonance on the low note, and the upper note has a free, easy quality, but isn't forced. That's what I mean by teaching yourself how to play the reed. Okay. Wow. And that process is just about all you need to do when you warm up. Okay. That's about all you need to do. And because we know the reed changes day to day based on humidity, and also it stiffens up and changes a little in the box, that process needs to be a daily pursuit, even if you're using the same reed. So you understand how it works, okay? So you always get back to this ease and flow in your playing.
When you come across a Bolero reed or a Czech 6 reed, are you setting those aside and keeping a collection of reeds in those ranges?
I do. I don't have a big collection, but I do have a little box of reeds in my refrigerator. They're vegetables, and so you can put a reed away and get it out a few months later or a year later, provided it hasn't molded or anything. It may work really well. I don't have skill like others do in making in advance a rite of spring reed. It's never worked for me. But what I've done is, I think most people do this. They'll break in reeds in batches, 5 reeds at a time, something like that. And sometimes there'll be one reed in there that, for whatever you do to it, it simply will not play low notes, but it plays really easy up high and has a good sound up high. So I pull back and say, I'm not going to ever make that into a general purpose reed because it just doesn't want to do it. But look at what it does over here. It's doing that pretty well. I'll set that reed aside, especially if I know that I've got to play, Song of the Nightingale or Rite of Spring coming up in a month or something like that. I'll start looking for those reeds.
What inspires you to play music?
I like very much the idea of making beauty together as a group. I think that's really nice. It's not a competition. We have sports for that. You know, that's a competition where there's a winner and a loser. Music, there's not a winner or a loser. There's a bunch of people coming together to speak a different language and to create something beautiful, and each person has a contribution to make.
Wow. What inspires you to teach?
Mainly just because I was taught so well and given this wealth of information, and I'm part of a very mainstream major tradition in American bassoon playing, and I want that knowledge to continue, and I feel like the stuff that I've got is much bigger than me and more important than me. So when people come in contact with it through me, I want them to feel like they've got this gift that they can continue to give themselves. You know, David Van Huzen was taught by many different people. The oboe professor at Eastman was a teacher of his in some ways, and so many others. But he developed a way of thinking about music that was pretty much complete. He had a way of approaching music where you could show him a piece of aleatoric music where you could start whenever you wanted and do more or less whatever you wanted. And he could tell you some guiding principles that made a lot of sense to that piece, that were the same guiding principles that worked for a piece by Bach. And so he had thought very deeply about this and had been taught that way. And there was this like he had made a complete kind of world philosophy of music for himself. And not many teachers can do that. A lot of teachers now that are really great at teaching the craft of playing the bassoon. They know everything about how to play technique and so on. And that's important too, don't get me wrong. But there are also people that don't want to teach the technique of the bassoon. They just want to teach music, and that's what they do in the bassoon lessons. And there's variations of that in between. But he had the ability to do all of that. He could teach you how to play technically really well. He had a lot of concrete ideas on how to improve your technique. But he also taught you how to think about the music too. So there was this sort of global approach that I so admired.
How often do you practice?
Well, that's a bad question to ask. I'll be real honest with you. I've learned how to practice to maximize my time on the instrument when I don't have a lot of time. During COVID, I have not been practicing very much. I've been doing other things, frankly. But to a certain extent, if you're in a major orchestra and you're rehearsing every day, there is a certain reliance on the orchestra to keep you in shape. And that's not necessarily a good thing. I'm not saying that's the way to be, ideally. But if you're not being asked to do other things, you know, play solo recitals, play chamber music or whatever, it's a very specific job description you have. And to a certain extent, you can practice a good amount, but you don't need to go crazy with, you know, 4 hours a day. It's not necessary. And the older you get, the more you whittle away at what's actually just wasting time for you. I did so much flailing when I was younger, just wasting time practicing in ways that were unproductive or unnecessary. And I think I've figured out pretty clearly what I need to do. All this is to say that I do recognize that when I don't have a recital to look forward to, or a chamber music performance to look forward to, and then one is coming up on the horizon, I have to change gears. I have to get back into doing some more things that will get me in shape and make me ready for that first rehearsal with my pianist, or so I don't become a boat anchor for them, in the stuff. Actually, doing long tones, finding your sound every day, playing scales. You don't need to do a lot more than that. Playing etudes, you don't need to do a lot more than that. If you're already a well-established musician who's played most of the standard repertoire, you know how that stuff is going to go. It's not like you're encountering it for the first time. So if I get my long tones going and my scales and articulation and so on, it's really helpful. I do find it's fascinating during COVID. I do find that the brain is very plastic, right? When it's not being asked to do a lot of specific things, it will focus on other things and develop in other directions. So when I come back to playing, there is a time where, frankly, counting and reading music is not as automatic as it would have been if I were just playing something every day, because my eye doesn't see music, 4 hours a day. And my brain isn't thinking subdivide, my brain isn't thinking pulse and all that. So some of that atrophies just a little bit. So when I go into a rehearsal, or even just counting rests, right? Things like that, you go into your first rehearsal and it's like, what did I just do? So I've learned to understand that that's probably going to happen for me. And so I will, when I get ready to start up again on something, if I've taken a break, I will practice with my part out there, and I will count rests to myself, or I will, play extra 2D parts that would normally be fine for me, just because my lip might be a little out of shape. I do things just to keep the reed in my mouth longer. Little things like that to get ready for the first performance, so you don't drag people down. I hate that. Right?
What are some important skills learned through music that apply to everyday life?
Yeah, I kind of alluded to it. The idea that you're just part of a bigger whole, and that if you cooperate and sense that you have a part to play, but you're not the whole thing, that just cooperation, socialization, understanding how people work together, learning to manage time, getting together to create something beautiful, to contribute to what it means to be human. All those things come through in music, And then also the other thing that it escapes me, but from time to time I become aware of it, is that people that are not in the field that we're in may have the same skill, but by and large, most people are not like focused on excellence, right? Most people go to work, they know there's the job they have to do, and when they get that job done, then they move on to something else. And it could be that they are perfectionists and they want it to be the best, spreadsheet ever made in the world or whatever. But that's very unusual and not required. It is required in our profession, and so it's hard for us to remember that there are people that are really not like us in that sense. And so the idea of and maybe this is another reason why, when you're asked to justify why a student goes into a music school with the idea that there are no jobs out there for them when they get out, the skill of learning how to do something excellently and learning how to ferret out all the little details that go into doing something well, that is an important life skill. It does translate. And to have that ability, that's not something that comes naturally to everybody. It's not taught necessarily all the time, but in our business it is an absolute essential quality. So and to be detail oriented too. I mean, that's another aspect that we don't see in a lot of other professions. I mean, there are other professions where that's emphasized, but not so much.
Mm-hmm. What is a typical day in the life like for you as a professional musician, pre-COVID and now maybe throughout COVID?
Yeah. Well, the work week in the Cleveland Orchestra is generally a Tuesday morning rehearsal, Wednesday morning, Wednesday afternoon rehearsal, Thursday morning rehearsal, dress rehearsal, Thursday night concert, Friday concert, Saturday concert, and maybe Sunday concert.
Wow.
And then Monday's free, or Sunday may be free too if they don't sell 4 concerts. My teaching occurs can occur on Fridays, and like sometimes I do Tuesdays and Fridays. Sometimes I've given up my Mondays and just taught on Mondays. That kind of is a normal looking work week for me. Now, of course, the winds are not playing at all. The strings are playing, no winds, so there's been nothing. And the teaching has been, schedule-wise, has been somewhat normal, but of course, with the restrictions, it's been very strange. So, it's hard to compare now.
Could you please tell me about any life advice that you would like to share?
I think I've already given some. I think the pursuit of excellence is a really worthwhile skill for people to learn. And the discipline of doing something well. Also, not being afraid to fail and to make mistakes and learn from them and adapt your approach to do something better. That's really important. To love beauty and art, things that make humans different from other primates. That's really a good pursuit. And also to just immerse yourself in the tradition you're part of, the great wealth of artwork, plays, paintings, music, all of those things out there that humans have created over the centuries that are transformative. I mean, it's really something to be part of that. And I wish everybody would play an instrument or sing in a group or something like that. It'd be such a better place. Yeah, it's really a beautiful thing to be able to do.
Barry, what brings you joy?
I guess just when I play with other people and things go well and it feels easy and free, and or I hear something I've never heard in a piece before. That's really great. My wife gives me great joy, and my daughters do. And my students, especially this semester, my students have given me great joy. I have two people at Cleveland Institute of Music who selected in-person instruction, and we not actually really in person. It's I'm in one room and you're in the other, and we're wired with this zero latency technology. But I really valued their commitment to the school to be present in spite of, less than ideal circumstances, and the lesson material they brought to every lesson was of good quality and quantity, and they never seemed daunted or undeterred by what was going on. Their idealism and talent and discipline has been really impressive. And I told them that at the end of the semester. Yeah.
This is just our last question. Is there a bassoonist that you would like to see interviewed?
Yeah. Um, my colleague in the orchestra, Phil Austin, I admire greatly, and he's somebody that, for whatever reason, has not been picked out by the Double Reed Society crowd for notice.
Mm,
And Phil had a fascinating career. He's done so many things, and I will say that he is the best bassoon player I've ever played with, from the
mm,
standpoint of being able to do all the things you have to do on the instrument, as far as a great sound, super intonation, incredible control of the instrument, very musical, and a good colleague too. So I'd put him out there. I would be very interested in hearing what he had to say. You know, if I think of some other people, I'll send their names your way. But I would definitely interview him.
I would love that. Barry, thank you so much for joining me for this interview today. It's wonderful to get a glimpse into your life and as a professional musician. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. It's great catching up with you, Julie. And I love what you're doing. I support it, and I think it's just a terrific gift to the bassoon world and music world.
Mm. Thank you. For everyone tuning in, keep an eye out for new videos with great bassoon guests every Thursday or Friday, depending on your time zone. Please comment on, like, and share this video, and subscribe to this channel for notifications. Thank you for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next video.